and Laura Malone. I think many of you may know Laura more broadly, but I think this is sort of your first webinar introduction, Laura. So joined the team a year ago. I gave her a horrible onboarding, and she just jumped in and started swinging, and it's been great. So very long background in exactly these types of cases. So glad to have Laura on the team for about 37 different reasons, in addition to helping us here today with the webinar. So we're going to talk about top 10 strange, interesting, and I will think that some of you will admit and agree that they are some zany ones in here too. For 2025, I included sort of the back by popular demand, probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but a lot of people liked the one that we did in 2024. And then as a team, we talk about these cases like, well, that'd be good for the year-end one. So I'm not saying we had like 20 and we had to cut to 10, but it wasn't too hard to create our list of 10 strange, interesting, and zany ones too. So with that, we'll just jump in. I'll do very quickly sort of our overview. Many of you have heard this before. I only do this too because people have watched this or watched any one of our 60 roughly webinars in the past, and then I'll get this email that say, oh, yeah, that's right, you guys do this, and I've watched like 70 of your webinars. Like, yes, I talk about it every time right on the front end. So it's not meaningful until it pops up, which I get. So very briefly, I'll sort of go top right to left. So emergency assistance funds have a separate foundation, separate team and staff that handle now. It's about just over 400 typically corporate funds as emergency relief and hardship grants and disaster relief for their employees. So have a very large activity sort of in that space. Bottom right, doing things just like this. Finally off the road, finally for this year. I think I did maybe 70 days out this year. Fun when I'm there, not fun getting there, but I definitely enjoy it too. Ryan's doing a lot more speaking. I know Laura does, and many of the other members of the team do as well. But it's for CE, primarily for professional advisors, but also for board staff and donors. Bottom middle there, a lot of activity in the charitable appraisal space. My sort of tagline is, if you can give it to charity, we can appraise it. I had a friend last night email from Los Angeles saying there's a local piece of real estate. I'm like, not that. So that's the only thing we don't appraise is local real estate. But if it were in an LLC and they had already had an appraisal on that local real estate and needed the LLC business appraisal, then we'd be sort of all over that. So do a lot of the business appraisals, tons and tons and tons of crypto appraisals for this year, which were really for last year, given the activity there too. Life insurance and all the other stuff you see here. So basically, if you can give it to charity during life as a life income gift or through an estate, and you need a qualified appraiser to do a qualified appraisal, we have a whole team that just does these for charitable transactions. Gift annuity stuff, got three gift audits that I'm doing right now. That's sort of their top middle, and really just do actuarial stress testing, looking at potential issues within the pool, if there are any exhaustions. The bottom line is to be able to minimize risk to be able to maximize the residuals. And so if they're large concentrated risks, we've got 2 or 3 right now we're working on for potential reinsurance on very large ones. So do the design and brokerage for those as well. For charities that say, look, we love gift annuities, but we don't like issuing them for a particular weird asset. Just did one with crypto. I don't think made this zany one, but I think we did that about 3 weeks ago ish. For the different asset or for a particular state. We all know the problematic states. We have the National Gift Annuity Foundation. So we're in all 50 states. 100% of the residuum is then granted back to the charity or charities that the donor wishes. I'm emphasizing that point because we get a number of calls from people saying, hey, I love University X. They can do a gift annuity, but I have 3 other charities that I love too, and Charity X understandably doesn't want to do the gift annuity, manage the liability and the risk for the 3 other charities. What can I do? National Gift Annuity Foundation. It can come in, give the chunk to the university as well as to the other 3 charities. We also are doing a ton of QCD gift annuities, a lot more than I ever expected. About a third-ish of our gift annuities now are QCD gifts. You can see we're closing in real fast. I've got 1,200 plus because I keep forgetting to update this. I think we're like at 1,175 gift annuities. We're doing roughly 1.5 every day. Again, for charities that otherwise would have said no. which gets to our mission on the top, which I should have mentioned is we help make charitable gifts happen that otherwise wouldn't. The final point is the non-cash stuff. A lot of these zany ones we're going to talk about today were on the non-cash side. Key point here is we have a national donor advised fund, technically two, one in trust form, one in corporate form. Any kind of larger value non-cash asset, you can see we've received roughly, actually it says close to, it's over now, 5 billion in donations, 100% of which were declined by the charity who referred it. We have a whole team now. It's roughly 30 people with different expertise areas just working on these particular gifts. That average is a bit high. I wonder if it's going to be about that high again this year. I've got that 5.2 million, but average fee tends to be about that 1.2 to 1.4%, such that 98% plus on the dollar is then granted out. One key point here is we're doing a lot of charitable remainder trusts as well with non-cash assets, but also with liquid and marketable securities where we can then serve as trustee. So again, it's around risk management through aggregation to help both the vehicles and the assets be donated. And the final point is we have roughly a third of our foundation's assets are in concentrated positions, either as a longer term hold, generally speaking, or as direct investments. So Ryan actually leads that area, and we've got 2 or 3 of those we're working on right now too. Very quickly, the next slide is just sort of what happened last year. I'm not going to go through this because I want to talk, want to have plenty of time, obviously, for the cases today. But I would think most importantly, we went from roughly 175, I think that was right, donations in 2023, roughly, to 295 in 2024. You can see there's about 733 million. I think we were at about 840, 850 million through the third quarter of this year. So roughly in that range. We'd already exceeded our last year by the third quarter. We typically double our entire year in the last quarter. Don't know if that's going to happen. The point is we should be well over $1 billion if we aren't already. And we have literally a couple hundred gifts lined up for the next whatever that is, 42 days. I'm looking at my calendar here. So the point is tons and tons of activity for this year should well exceed what we did for last year. And some of those we're going to talk about right now. So Ryan, I'll pass it over to you to take us through the agenda and the top 10 cases.
As we
Yeah,
transition,
thanks,
we
Brian.
just get a quick hand raise that everybody is seeing the slides. I did have somebody come in the Q&A saying they weren't seeing it, and I just want to make sure
Good.
it's not
Looks like
Okay.
okay.
isolated
Yeah,
thing.
great.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that housekeeping. Super quick on housekeeping too. I should have said this. Any questions, just put in the Q&A. We'll scrape the ones from today and Thursday, as you know, include this on our library, number one. And then we do not send out these slides directly, but again, we will send a full recording. We have a whole YouTube library now of all of the different ones that we've done in the past. It's much more searchable. So with that, I'll pass it over to Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So normally, anyone who's tuned into these before knows that normally with the agenda, we kind of give a preview of the topics. Not going to do that today. Just wanted to actually have this agenda to prove we promised 10 items. We are going to deliver 10 items. You can see them listed out here. So there they are. With that said, we'll just dive in. So the first one, this one was unusual in a number of different ways. This donor had given real estate to Decami to support his alma mater, a university. About 5 years ago, he had given a number of rental properties, and the donor is based in Denver, where I am. The rental properties were in Denver. University was not. It all worked pretty well. He'd give one property to Decami. We would turn around and sell it. Then he'd give another, and we would just rinse and repeat. He had a property manager who managed all the properties that was also a broker. It worked really cleanly. 5 years later, he's now 5 years older, and he's got an asset that is a little more complicated. It was productive farmland located a few states away in the Midwest. And in this case, he didn't have a broker. He knew that we could help him with this because we'd done it before. And he really needed a lot of assistance. And despite the fact that he has an accountant and had, I think, more than one attorney, he really wanted me to manage the entire process. And I don't do much real estate on my own for Decamai anymore, as Laura can attest to. Usually I'm handing it off or working with one or more other people on our team who are often better able to handle the gifts than I am. But I knew in this case, this donor, it was not going to work to do a handoff. I had to do the whole thing. And at his age, he really needed that help. You know, he's in his 90s now. I didn't believe, and I don't believe that there were any capacity issues, but I needed to make sure that, you know, his CPA knew this was happening, his attorney knew this was happening, the college knew what was happening, and even some family members. I had spoken with his daughter, who was part of the family trust and was one of the trustees, and made sure that she understood the gift. So you know, there was a lot of discussion to make sure that everyone understood that this gift was going to happen, because it was a fairly valuable piece of farmland. He was able to get the appraisal with the help of kind of a local friend, and it did appraise, you know, upwards of $1.5 million. So quite valuable, quite a bit of acreage. And so once he was ready to do the donation, he said, well, I want as much money as possible to go to my college. Please do not hire a broker. Please do not put it up for auction, because they will take a commission, and that will reduce the amount of cash that's available for charity. So can you please, Ryan, negotiate the sale directly and find a buyer? Hopefully the tenant can buy it. So that's something that we don't do very often. Almost always when we get real estate, we use a broker, and we'll talk about another case in a little bit, and multiple other cases, I think, where we used a broker right away for real estate. Not here. This was a direct negotiation with the buyer. In this case, the tenant farmer was the person who I went to first, and did significant back and forth negotiation of terms, closing timeline, purchase price, of course. And with every turn of the negotiation, I'm having to check in with the donor and reassure him everything's going okay. You know, we're making progress, and he's encouraging me to try and get the highest price possible. And I'm telling him we've got to keep our expectations reasonable. And for all the room for things to blow up here on this one, which I did realize as I was going through, you know, this could have gone sideways very, very easily in a bad way. I was pleased to actually get the property closed on time at a price that the donor was happy with, his college was happy with, and we just sent the grant out on Friday, actually. So they've got the money now. The donor was thrilled, because I was able to tell him right before he left to go back to his 60th class reunion that, you know, we had closed. And you know, he was so nervous. I think he was losing sleep that the deal would fall apart at the last second, and so it just it took a lot of hand holding, but we got it across the finish line, and a positive result. So I was pleased with a case that really had you know, a potential to go south in a lot of different ways, between the donor's age, the sale negotiations, kind of the distance. And this was rural farmland, you know, pretty far from everything. But it ended up being a good result, everyone happy, and I wish every real estate deal could have that result, because I've done enough of them, and I know that they don't all end that way. So Laura and I thought we should probably start with one that had a happy ending here, and so that's this one, and this next one, Laura will talk about. I was less involved in, and I think I'm a bit thankful. This one was messy.
Yeah, this is a great example of, you know, we talk a lot about the gifts that we accept and the gifts where we take over the ownership and we step in. This one's a little bit different. This is one where we came in purely as an external consultant. This was a retained life estate that was created a number of years ago by a donor. He wanted to support 8 different nonprofits. He wanted his sister to continue to live in the property during her lifetime, and ultimately, you know, set up the retained life estate. He lived in one state. The sister in the property was multiple states over. And somewhere along the line, the local community foundation got brought in and said, hey, can you be the point person on this? Can you be the one to actually hold the title and then, handle the idea of when this is done, that you can step in and do all this and we'll pay you a fee for that. And the community foundation was happy to step up and do it. It was a great donor, great relationship they felt in their community to be able to run point on these things. And hey, what could go wrong, right? They took over everything. They had the deed in their name. They reached out to the homeowners association and said, hey, keep us posted. Anything goes on with the sister, anytime you need us, just give us a call. Years went by, never heard anything. All of a sudden, something happened. The sister died. And not only did the sister pass away, but it took 6 weeks for the homeowners association to tell the community foundation that the sister died. And nobody had access to the property. Nobody had keys. It turns out that the donors' children, the nieces and nephews of the sister, kind of came in the middle of the night after she died, took everything out of the place, changed the locks because they were disgruntled that, they weren't getting a piece of this property and a piece of that asset. And the community foundation sitting here saying, we don't know what's going on with this property. We don't know what shape it's in. We don't know how to access it. We're 5 states away. We need help, and we can't just deed this over to you because we're bound by these agreements. And, so much time has gone on by this point that we don't even know how many of these 8 charities remember that they're the potential beneficiary of this. So to try and get everybody corralled to allow for the transfer of ownership, to let you guys step in your normal form and fashion, that's just spending more time that we don't know what we have, because there could be who knows what rotting in the fridge, who knows what going on inside the property that we have no awareness of. So we were able to step in as a contractor, as a project manager, to be able to go in and deal with, getting the agent, get access to the property, getting a locksmith to change the locks so we could get into the property, and really go through that process of being their boots on the street and their boots on the ground to help them take care of this. We were very fortunate in the fact that where the sister had lived, where this retained life estate was, there was a very experienced realtor that lived in that same property area, that knew the properties very well, that was able to step in and really be an extreme help with this. The property was in much better shape than I think everybody had feared, with the idea of not knowing what was going on with 6 weeks of, potentially no utilities, not knowing what was left behind in the property. So the cleanup was not as bad as we feared, but there was definitely that fear of the unknown in the front part of this process that really had everybody concerned about what they would contend with. So we operated as that project manager. We worked on behalf of the community foundation as their designee to make sure that all of this got taken care of, make sure the property got sold. 2 months later, we did get the property sold and get those proceeds, and the community foundation was able to get those proceeds and continue on with the rest of the plan to distribute those assets to those 8 charities that were the recipients on behalf of the donors. So at the end of the day, it worked out great, but there was a lot of anxiety on that front end with just not knowing what everybody was going to be dealing with and what was going to be the path that everybody was going to be facing in all of this. So that was, I think, part of what made this case so interesting, as well as the idea of, so much of what we see is us stepping and taking ownership, but this is a great time where we can be of assistance without necessarily taking ownership. And Ryan, I know you have your own thoughts on that.
Yeah, because we've been in the position of the community foundation in a case like this before, where there were 8 beneficiary charities out of an estate to receive 8 different real estate investments. And that's not one investment per charity, it's each investment split 8 ways. So those charities said these have to go through a single conduit, which was going to be Decami, and it was a nightmare, because it was negotiation with each charity to make sure they understood how the relationship was going to work, working with the estate attorneys, this was a state where the state attorney general had to sign off on a disposition like this. It took literally years. not years to resolve the gift. The gift is still ongoing. Years to actually wind down the estate and get ownership transferred to us. So in this case, Laura's fact pattern is hairy enough as it is. I think this is a cleaner one, and from my standpoint, than the one that I worked on, which if anyone from our finance department is watching this right now, they probably know exactly what case I'm referring to, because they deal with that headache pretty much once every couple of weeks.
A little bit of PTSD.
Yeah.
So another case that we've had that actually is still quasi ongoing. The gift is complete, but we are still in the process of liquidating some of this asset. This was a case of a private foundation that is trying to wind down its assets. And, the private foundation was the recipient of other assets that came from a marital trust. There's probably 2 or 3 layers of the onion above where we are right now with the private foundation, that it got to trickle down to this point before it got to the private foundation. There was some elements related to that trickle down into the private foundation that actually didn't allow the private foundation to make the gifts to a donor advised fund. They had these LLC interests. They wanted to gift them out. It needed to go to the idea of a public charities. They had the LLC owns commercial real estate. The property was under contract. Because it is a private foundation, because of some of that nuance of who the donor is as a private foundation, some of our norms that we normally preach against weren't necessarily applying. The fact that it's a prearranged sale didn't carry as much weight or as much as anxiety as we talk about it doing at other times. The need for the appraisal wasn't as relevant because it was a private foundation making those transfers. So a lot of those things that we preach about as being, so important were a little bit less important in this stage, except for the fact that this didn't need to go to these public charities. It couldn't come to us directly and then make a grant to the public charities like we normally would. So what ended up happening is that the private foundation made those gifts to the public charities, and rather than creating a donor advised fund at Decami, they actually created 2 separate designated funds. So Charity A has a designated fund for the benefit of Charity A. Charity B has a designated fund for the benefit of Charity B. And instantaneous to those charities taking on the LLC, they gifted the LLC to us as assets of those designated funds rather than the donor advised funds. So that allowed for them to be able to get the benefits of the asset, because once we have that liquidity event, that will now create a designated fund for their benefit without them having the asset on their books long term, which is what most charities are trying to avoid to begin with. So that, the challenge that came with that to some degree was just the idea that ultimately this is the same asset. So it is 2 separate charities, it is 2 separate designated funds, but ultimately it's the same asset. So while each organization had their own things they wanted to look out for and have in their designated fund agreements and their memos of understanding, we had to be able to treat this as the same animal. We couldn't necessarily go and give benefits to one organization that we weren't giving to the other organization. So we had to find a way to meet in the middle between both organizations and how the designated funds were crafted, what allowances we were able to do and willing to do as an organization, to be able to make sure that both of those people were on the same page, having mirror image agreements, because fundamentally this still was that single LLC that was going to be funding both of these gifts. So that luckily worked out very well at the end of the day. And we did get those gifts just within the last 30 days or so. And we did find out that we are under contract still. There has been some delays, but those delays seem to be lifted. So we are hoping that that liquidity event of that underlying real estate should be happening fairly soon, where these designated funds can be funded. Ryan, back to you with our...
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think the title here for this this case is purposely understated. Some land and stores and tenants in Florida. really that this was a fairly sizable shopping center. 20 tenants is quite large. And this came to us from a religious organization. Uh, they were local to the area, but we were not super close. We do have a number of people in Florida, as I think most people watching this know. But it wasn't something that they could handle. And there were some time constraints because this is not stated in the slides, but we probably should have said it. This came to us in December last year to be a 2024 gift. So we have a complex piece of commercial real estate that needed to be done in a month. And that's a big ask to begin with. Normally, with commercial real estate, my experience is those types of gifts typically take at least 2 or 3 months, usually a massive effort coordinating between the donors, attorneys, and accountants, and brokers, and property managers, and our team. But this came together in a month, which is impressive on its own. I didn't work on this one, so I'm giving compliments to other team members here. And then what made it, I think, even more challenging is not just getting the donation done and transferring various contracts over. What made it more complicated was there was an on-site property manager who dealt with kind of day-to-day tenant issues, car broken down in the parking lot type of thing. But there wasn't someone managing the leases, doing renewals and lease negotiations, uh, you know getting bids on repairs, paying contractors. So we had to take over all of that responsibility. So when we talk about owner and CEO, really for the period of time where Decami was the owner of this shopping center, we were really being much more hands-on than we might otherwise be in the case of some commercial real estate, where often you would have a property manager who isn't just doing the on-site stuff, but is handling all of kind of the business aspect as well. So we were doing all of that this time, which I think was quite time consuming for some members of our team. And then because it was a large piece of commercial real estate, that usually requires not just a run-of-the-mill broker, but typically you want a sophisticated commercial real estate brokerage firm like Coldwell Banker or CBRE, someone like that. And I don't know if it was those firms that we were using here, but that's the type of firm that you have to bring in to assist with the sale process and vet qualified buyers, who in turn are going to be using their sophisticated brokers to vet the property and ask a lot of questions about operations and financials and the leases. So the sale process is very drawn out. With residential real estate, usually you can expect to close in 30 days unless you're in New York. With commercial real estate, usually closing, 4 months, 6 months, could be even longer than that. Even if you, the seller, and the buyer are aligned the whole time, it just takes a lot longer. And that means not just negotiation with the buyer and working with the buyer during that time frame, but also continuing to manage the property during that time frame, because that's what the buyer expects the seller to do, is keep the property running. We did all of this without hiring an attorney, so we handled the negotiation of the purchase and sale internally, and were able to not just successfully close on the sale of the property, but also transition all of that management to the new ownership. And probably the most impressive thing here, that it was done in only 7 months. For a shopping center like this is incredible. I think the prior slide may have mentioned we've done shopping centers and malls before. Sometimes they've been held for years on our books because it takes a long time to find the right buyer. And to get this done in just 7 months, really remarkable. And again, I was not the one leading the charge or really involved all that much in this one at all. So, I couldn't believe it when I heard this one had sold. I was blown away that it would happen so quickly, particularly because Laura and I were working on a different piece of commercial property at about the same value also in Florida at the same time, and it required a lot of work from the same kind of back office and real estate team. So just the fact that they didn't get the two of them confused was impressive.
There's a lot to keep track of with that, with both of them at the same time.
So here's a bad pun here, to shift gears a little bit from real estate, and we've talked a bit about these have been real estate gifts, but kind of from different angles. A couple of them have been outright gifts to Decami as a donor advised fund, but to Laura's point, one was a designated fund, one was a consulting agreement with Charitable Solutions. I think if there's a theme for this webinar, it's that we're doing weird gifts, and it's not always just that it's real estate to a DAF or private stock to a DAF, although we are still doing that, and we're going to talk about that. But sometimes it's designated fund or a consulting relationship. And sometimes we get really weird stuff, like in this case, the supercar. And we talked about this in the Shiny Drivey Things webinar a bit, but there was no way we could exclude it from this list at the year end. Early in this year, we got contacted by a community foundation who had a donor who was very, very charitable, and he wanted to give his car away. And we do get car inquiries, probably 1 or 2 a month, and they basically never work because the value just isn't there. Even a $200,000 collectible car, which is a very valuable car, I'm probably never going to own a car that pricey. It's just not really good for charitable giving because of the logistical challenges involved, the tax challenges. You just don't see these gifts work. This was one where it did. The value was close to $1 million on this Ford GT. The donor was extremely charitable, did not really care about the deduction all that much, just didn't want to pick up the capital gain. So that's really promising. If you're going to have a gift of tangible property or a collectible or a vehicle work, you really need a donor who is more charitably motivated and has a very high value asset, like the Ford GT here. And the donor was really willing to work with us to get this done. And in fact, he had worked not just with the community foundation, but also with his garage to arrange for the garage to serve as a dealer, and it was a dealer in the state, to facilitate us putting it up for auction. And what's more, the donor again was so charitable and so open about his charitable goals. As a successful executive, he had a lot of connections who could help him with kind of the PR and promo effort. So we worked with the auction house, with the dealer, with the charity to craft a lot of press release language that really illustrated the donor's charitable goals here. It went up for auction. It sold in about a week through a big online vehicle auction house. And then it resulted in the charity was actually a British charity overseas. So we made the grant to the donor's local community foundation, who had already vetted that overseas charity was able to make the grant. So it ended up being a huge amount of money for this charity. Special Effect is the name. I'll mention them by name. Like I said, the donor was very transparent. He didn't even care about his name being used, which is unusual for most donors. I won't say it here, but you could probably look it up and figure it out pretty easily. So, it was just a very unique asset, one that almost never works otherwise. But here, all of the facts lined up so that we had a really good result for a charity that the donor was very passionate about. I think it's accessibility for children with physical handicaps. So it was just a cool asset, very one of a kind, and a very focused charitable effort from the donor from the outset. So it was really fun to work on.
And now to a different type of car.
Before you get to the shiny
Yeah.
car, we'll go back to the drivey car. Ryan, do you remember? There's a good question that came up. Do you know if the particular community foundation did a direct grant to the UK charity, or whether they used like Married USA with King Baldwin, or CAF America, something like that? Or do you recall? I couldn't remember whether they did or not. But
I think they may have made a direct grant.
okay, yeah, maybe.
I think they were doing that in-house, because I did talk to them a little bit to make sure that they were able to do it, and they said, "Yeah, yeah, we've got it figured out."
Kind of the equivalency determination, all that stuff. Okay, all good.
I think, yeah.
So our next story is going to shift to a different type of car, and I can't help when I was thinking of this story, the idea of how many times have we all moved and we think we've purged enough from our old house, and we get to our new house and we say, you know what, I probably could have purged a little bit more. This is kind of a story along those lines in a weird fashion. So we had a donor that relocated from, somewhere in the north of the US to somewhere more in middle America of the US. And at the end of that process, once she got resettled in her new state after moving 5, 6 states away, she decided, you know what? This gold that I've been hanging on to, all these gold coins that were my husband's collectibles, he's gone. I don't want to lug these around anymore. So she reached out to her financial advisor and she approached him about, what could she do with these precious metals? And we were talking about hundreds of different, primarily gold coins, some silver coins, literally 2 safes worth. I'm still puzzled as to how exactly she got them across the states without the movers really knowing what they were moving, but that's probably another story for another time. Um, the financial advisor reached out to us and said, hey, what can we do to help her with this? And as you know, referencing back to our Shiny Drivey webinar, this typically isn't going to be a good charitable deduction necessarily, but it is going to be like the car, a lot of charitable liquidity for what the donor wants to do for their charitable intent. So, all these coins, we brought in our specialist. He flew into where she was living. He met up with the financial advisor and, members of his team we'd already sent along a list of all the inventory, 7 pages of various coins of various types, US, Canadian, Cougarand, all sorts of different things that were on that list, re-inventoried the gold coins to make sure everything matched up with what we had in our lists. Literally hired an unmarked armored car to come and collect all of this from the woman's new home and take it back to go ahead and liquidate and redeem back in for what ended up being over $2.5 million of philanthropic capital for this donor. So ultimately, it was a great experience for her to be able to have that liquidity. It's a great way for her to continue to honor her husband's memory and his passions in a different way than, carrying around 2 safes worth of gold and silver coins. And it was a great way for them to be able to facilitate an offer like this. And it's interesting to see how many calls we've had over the last 3 to 6 months at least, that have been not quite to this degree, but definitely similar in the sense of, the precious metals market is definitely high. We've definitely seen various stories that have come through where it is tied to, the person with the passion no longer being around and the heirs that are thinking, okay, what can we do with this? Because this isn't our passion. So it does help to create a great avenue to create that passion into purpose with charitable giving. And I think ultimately, everybody was thrilled with the outcome of this and how it all worked out to be able to go ahead and take, these coins that traveled 5 states, maybe even more, and, create them into something that could be a great donor advised fund for this donor to go ahead and continue her grant making, through this capital that she's created, through this passion of her husband's. So overall, it was a great story, but it's one of those things that as we talk about the idea of an armored car full of gold, everybody stops to pay attention. They say, what? What are you talking about? Really? That happened? Yeah, it happened.
And the last couple cases that Laura and I talked about they worked because of very charitably minded individual donors, and this one is charitably minded corporation. So it's again, it's a bit of a twist on the normal fact pattern. And as I was thinking about this slide, I've got a note here at the top of the slide. I thought, actually, in some ways, this is a case where the corporation's sponsoring an employee giving plan. That sounds an awful lot like one of the service lines that Brian talks about at the beginning of the hour, the employee disaster relief funds. And in some ways, it is similar because it's usually a corporate driven and sometimes officially sponsored effort to promote charitable giving among employees. With the disaster relief funds, of course, that's to help employees in need and help employee hardship. This is kind of a step away from that and more towards the traditional Decami giving, where it's a private stock donation. So in a lot of ways, it's like any other private stock donation where we had individual shareholders giving stock in a private company to fund a Decami DAF, and then Decami is holding until there's liquidity. But where it's different is that that employer sponsoring of the program, and that means we're not actually dealing as much with the individual donors. We still send them the donation receipt. We still answer their questions, sign their 8283s, but most of the time we're getting approached directly by the individual donors or their advisors. In this case, we're working with the company, and the company is coordinating and managing a lot of the communication and the paperwork. And in some ways, that's really good because it takes a lot of work off of us, particularly if we're talking about a large group of donors. But in some ways, it's bad because, well, first, we don't know how many donors there's going to be, and we don't have full control over the messaging. Everything that goes out has to be kind of managed by committee, and that's fine. It's kind of the nature of the beast with a gift like this. But we do give something up in terms of sort of, we're marching to the beat of someone else's drum. In this case, the corporation that is sponsoring this round of donations with its employees, giving their equity in the company. So it can work pretty well. And in fact, on the next slide, close viewers of these webinars may be saying, didn't you talk about this in last year's presentation on this subject a year ago? Isn't this a repeat? Aren't you cheating on that promise of 10 different cases? No, not quite. This is actually a different company. The one from last year, actually, that did still happen again this year, and I just finished selling that stock last week. That structure was a little bit different. That stock was in what's called an Up-C. So we got partnership units that were privately held but eligible to convert into public stock, which we could then turn around and sell. So that still happens, and it is actually in a lot of ways similar, where the corporation is the one kind of coordinating. But this new one this year, there's no Up-C structure. It's good and bad to that. The partnership structure sends it, it means we're going to get a K1. It's more complicated on the tax side of things, but we have a clear path to liquidity once we convert the stock into public stock and can sell it right away, like I just did last week. With this new one, the private stock, unfortunately, we don't have that same line on liquidity, which I think is probably the reason that a lot of charities and a lot of other donor advised funds would have trouble with this stock. The company told us straight up, and it told the employee donors too, we don't know when this stock will be able to be sold. It could be a long time. We hope it'll be soon, but we can't make any promises. So we've got a lot of donors giving stock in this company, and they're hoping to get some liquidity. Decami, frankly, is hoping to get some liquidity, but we don't know when it's going to be. Thankfully, the company does have rather frequent tender offers, so we're hopeful that we'll be able to participate. But again, it's kind of unknown. And that uncertainty, I think, is where we're able to accept a lot of donations like this, and other charities may not be able to. Another, well, it was private stock when we took it, pre-IPO and pre-revenue stock. So I worked on this one quite a bit, but I wasn't on the first couple of calls. Brian was, and then Brad Caswell on our team was kind of the main contact here. And it's probably good that they were on the initial calls and I was not, because I don't think I would have been quite as enthusiastic about this one. What we got initially was a call from a newer DAF and a newer partner of ours, where they had gotten an inquiry from a donor about a potentially very, very large private stock position. And this was not a group of multiple donors like the last case. This was a single donor potentially giving 9 figures worth of private stock. So very eye-catching number. And the donor needed to move very, very quickly because of some soon to be filed securities filings. So big gift, high degree of urgency. For me, that raises some red flags. What's more, the company was planning to go public, hadn't gone public yet, but didn't have any revenue. And so, and Laura will attest to this, we've done a number of donations of stock in companies not quite like this, different industries that have this kind of fact pattern, and it doesn't always pan out very well. Nonetheless, I wasn't on the initial calls to throw water on anything, probably good. So the donation went through in a timely manner. We got everything done. Had to do a lot of back and forth in terms of paperwork and making sure that everything was moving forward timely and in a way that wasn't going to interfere with any securities filings. Donation was done, and the company actually did go public very shortly after the donation was completed. And the stock then skyrocketed. So far, through today, it looks pretty good. A caveat there, we're still subject to a lockup on this stock. We can't sell it. We won't be able to sell it for, I think, another 4 or 5 months. So we're kind of stuck until that lockup expires, and we're really, really hoping that the price of the stock stays where it is now or goes up even further, because as it stands, we're sitting on these shares and there's not much we can do with them at the moment. So this is a case where the prior case I alluded to, the Up-C partnership, and that public stock was sellable right away. Not always the case when we talk about pre-IPO stock. We can and do often take stock ahead of a public offering, but it's usually subject to a lockup of at least 6 months, sometimes 12. And during that time, we and often the donors tend to get pretty antsy about the stock's performance, because when you're locked up, there's nothing you can do. And if it starts moving in the wrong direction, people start to feel pretty bad about how the donation is moving. So in this case, the outcome is kind of to be determined. Everyone, please keep your fingers crossed, and hopefully we will be able to deploy a lot of charitable dollars in the spring of next year. This is the last one for me, and then I think Laura has one more. This was, again, anyone who watches these would know we'd never do one of these without including some crypto. This was another donation that started in late 2024. We talk about a single donation and sale here, but actually it was 12 or 13, maybe even donations, separate donations, and 12 or 13 separate sales. The donor here was receiving significant tranches of cryptocurrency, kind of like vested stock options, where the vesting was occurring over a period of several months. And so he was getting a block of shares every week. But this wasn't Bitcoin, this wasn't Ethereum or Solana or one of the big cryptocurrencies. This was something that was in kind of the 30 to 50, top 30 or 50 coins by market cap. So it was tradable. It was trading a lot. There was value there. But the blocks of shares that he was receiving were so large that if we were to just take the shares, turn around, sell them all on Coinbase, which is normally our preference, we would have tanked the market. And he knew that, we knew that. And he said, I really think you should use my preferred and the crypto company's preferred connection there, who is a market maker overseas, to sell these coins. They can do it. They've done it a million times. They were and are a reputable group. So we said, okay, we'll do that. Of course, because this was a European market maker, they're subject to European Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering regulations. So at year end, of course, we have to go through the process of providing all the board member IDs, proof of address for senior leadership in Decami, proof of address for the board members, proof of corporate existence, all of this stuff to get everything set up so we're ready to go, so that right before Christmas, the donor can deliver the first tranche of tokens straight to the market maker. And this is where this took a lot of communication back and forth. The donor says, he would email or text me, Ryan, I'm going to deliver the shares to the market maker. Are you ready to confirm when they arrive? Then I would check in with the market maker, make sure they had received the shares. They'd confirm that back to me. I would say, okay, can we get a quote on pricing? They would give me a quote. I'd check with the donor and say, okay, does that pricing seem reasonable given where the coin is trading right now? And if so, then we would say, yes, please execute the sale. Market maker would do that. And then I'd say, okay, settle it out, send us the wire. And we did that every week for 3 months. And that on its own was, especially to start with, it was quite a bit of work. As we settled into a groove, it became pretty easy. It wasn't that painful, after we'd done half a dozen of them. But I think for our Decami's back office, it was quite a lot of work, because they're having to book 12 different donations and then 12 different sales, and then match the wires that are coming in every week, every time a different amount, to each individual donation, and produce donation letters, and then coordinate on the grants and get the donor sign off and make sure the donor is seeing the listing appropriately of, this sale had this much in terms of sale proceeds, this was the fee, and then next week the same thing. Very complicated for the back office and for the donor. And I haven't even seen, most of this was a 2025 transaction. I haven't even seen 8283s from the donor yet. 12 different donations means 12 different appraisals. I don't know how they're going to fit all of that information on the 8283, which only has lines for, I think, 4 different donations. So probably looking at 3 different fully filled out 8283s. From a tax reporting standpoint, it is quite a lift. Now, in aggregate, it was a huge donation. I think about over $30 million. But so worthwhile for the donor, and the donor didn't want to pick up $30 million worth of income. But to split up a donation of this size into 12 pieces, that makes sense in terms of managing the market, but maybe in terms of accounting and tax reporting, it becomes very, very complicated. But we got through it successfully. The money has long since moved on. The trades are all settled. So that was a good result from early in 2025. So we got a few minutes for the last one here.
A nice sigh of relief. So for those that know me, you know how much I love business exit planning, and from my past life working with the National Donor Advisement Program how much I love working with financial advisors. So this is a great story. It's not my story. This was one that our friend Paul Casperson worked on and was kind enough to share with us the background. But it was a retiring financial advisor that lived in California, planning on selling his book of business to a junior advisor. He established early on through his legal and tax counsel that he could go ahead and donate a portion of his client list and his book of business to us, that it could be recognized as a capital asset, that it wouldn't be considered ordinary income. And because it would be considered a capital asset, it would classify as having zero basis. So he did go ahead and negotiate, or gave the book to us, or gave his half of the book to us, about $1 million of estimated value. We did put that into a charitable remainder flip net income trust, which then, sold that book of business to the junior advisor in exchange for an 8-year note at 7%. So, the unusual part about this is, I think, not just the idea that it's, something that is maybe more so overlooked in the sense of a book of business. Brian will chime in probably a little bit later in regards to, we actually see this a lot, but I think a lot of folks don't think of this as an asset. They get caught up in thinking about widgets, or in regards to microchips, or, some other type of, hard asset type of company. But these types of companies, are probably a good chunk of what we see in transactions. I think the interesting nuance here, and Brian and Ryan might chime in with more color on this, is the idea of, this wasn't necessarily the firm. This was the individual advisor and his individual book of business. So, I think that also lends to a little bit more uniqueness than the idea of it being the actual firm that's selling. We're just looking at that book of business, and the idea that, not only is this falling within the tolerance of the idea of it being a book of business, but also the idea of the note. The other interesting factor that Paul brought up when we were talking about this was the idea of the challenge in finding the right appraiser for something like this. In order to meet that qualified appraisal standard, you have to be able to find somebody that's done these types of transactions and has that niche that they work with in this space. So, I think what I like about this most of all is the idea that, a lot of the folks on this call are with nonprofits, interact with nonprofits. These are folks that could be on your boards. These are folks that could be part of your steering committees. These are conversations that, really, when we think about, our businesses and our business owners, thinking about these practitioners as a really key component to consider as you're talking with opportunities and thinking about opportunities, with these individuals that are in these types of businesses, because that can be a great opportunity to really be able to leverage that. And that's, I think, what I like the most about this. I know also the idea of the charitable remainder trust is a great attribute. The note's another great attribute to this, and how it was able to all work out to everybody's benefit in the end, that everybody could get what they wanted and needed out of this and do great things for philanthropy. So, I like ending this one on a high note. And Brian, I know you want to add some thoughts on this as well.
Well, for a minute, how did you guys get through 10 with 2 minutes to spare? And I shouldn't tell everybody this. We don't rehearse any of these things. So it just, it works out or it doesn't. That's all we do too. So well done, by the way. But the only thing I would say here, obviously this was for a CRT. We sort of peeled off right before this call. I guess we rehearsed for 5 minutes. There's this one, this one. We went through, I mean, at least 4 or 5 that were very similar as just outright gifts to donor advised funds. We did one that was an estate attorney selling her book, her personal book, to another estate attorney. Ryan and I think worked on one that was a very large transaction in the Midwest. I think it was a Northwestern Mutual advisor selling his personal book. And we do tons of typical LLC electing to be taxed as S RIAs, as single or sort of small group practitioners, as part of the always fun RIA roll up, junior, just like this, junior advisor purchasing either the book or the equity, merger or acquisition. So I really encourage, when I do CE talks to advisors, I'll say, look, we're talking about this from your client standpoint. I don't know if this number's right, but I bet it's pretty close. I bet 15%-ish of sort of these, smaller LLC S Corp type donations are their actual advisors themselves doing exactly these types of donations. So just really want to encourage you to, as Laura said, think about those within your network. Look at it. We had the shiny drivey things that came up a couple times during the questions here. So we have over 60, I think now. I should have a count of these webinars. We started these during COVID. We thought we'd do it for a couple months, and here we are over 5 years later. We do hope that they're helpful. Any topics that you have, definitely let us know. But we have a YouTube channel that have all of them there, again, all free. And they also all have the Q&A from both of the sessions, again, which we'll compile today's and Thursdays. But Laura, Ryan, incredibly well done. There are a number of other ones I thought could easily have made this list. So we definitely we work in the weird the world of weird, I guess. But most importantly, these are all good donors with good assets, generally wanting to do good things. And so rather than having charities say no for whatever reason, quick turnaround time, what is a armored car full of gold, supercar, don't say no. We can't do a lot of these, but we can do a lot too. So thank you all very much for your time, and hope this is helpful. Have a great year end.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks all.